My name is Jean M. Walker. I was born in Independence, Missouri, and lived there all my life until I moved to the house where I am now in Raytown. I've been there for 51 years, a long time. And everything started with me. Well, I was a science teacher. Late in life, I went and got my teaching certificate and taught middle school science for about 20 years for the Kansas City, Missouri School District. I retired about 8 years ago. When you are a teacher, it just consumes your whole life. That's all you do. So after I retired, I happened on to a UFO conference. And I found out there that they had MUFON meetings here in Kansas City. So I started attending them once a month, and I just really felt a connection with MUFON because I was learning a lot and hearing other people's experiences, and I had had so many of these myself. So I become very intrigued with MUFON, and I took my test. I became an investigator. Later, I became a STAR team investigator. And I just kept working with MUFON and doing cases, UFO cases. We're assigned cases. People see things or they think they see something. They know it's not normal. So they report it to MUFON and they assign the cases to an investigator in that area. And after that, I became a section director, and I now am responsible for the meetings for MUFON. We do a lot of Skype, and we interview a lot of people that have written books, a lot of authors on the subject of UFOs, and anything pertaining to it. I will say one of the biggest shocks I've had in working with MUFON and doing investigations was how often when I'm doing the investigation and cryptid animals will come up, all kinds of creatures I've had reported to me. It isn't just the lights, and the paranormal. Sometimes it's very hard to distinguish between what's paranormal and what is UFO. So I've worked with MUFON for going on about 5 years now. And I love it. Just really enjoy doing this. I meet a lot of nice people. And so then things started coming to me at such a rate, and I started recording a lot of things. And I have one sibling, a brother. We would get together and we would talk, and I would write down all the stuff that had happened to us as children on up. And I spent 4 years just trying to put everything together and remembering things. I joined an experiencer group for abductions, and I found it was hard for me to talk because it was so emotional. Some of this stuff is so emotional to me. So I decided I could write, and it was easier. So I wanted to write a book about all the things that had happened to me and my brother. And after doing so many investigations and dealing with ETs so much, I really began to feel that it was a family or type thing where it runs in families, certain bloodlines. I don't know if it's the DNA, why they pick certain families, but even the paranormal seems to follow that. It started off with my great-grandmother. She was a well-known psychic in Kansas City in the 50s. She felt that the gift she had, she was to help others, and that's what she used it for. In my book, I tell about some very funny things that she did as a psychic, and also some very serious things that she did. She was quite a character. I was 9 years old when she passed away, and I remember her so well because she was so different. And then for me personally, the first thing I remember was I was in my crib and I seen this horrible face. Scared me to death. And it's the only thing I remember at that age. I was only maybe a year old, and I remember this awful face leaning over my crib looking at me, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs. I didn't realize, I didn't know what an alien was. Well, I mean, even growing up as I got older, I had thought about this. What was that? What was that thing that scared me so bad? And like I said, it's the only thing I remember at about a year old. I think they picked me for what they were going to use me for the time I was in a crib from an infant. Throughout my childhood then, my parents at the time I was born lived with my grandparents, my maternal grandparents. And then my brother came along. He's almost 2 years younger than me. When he was 6 months old, we moved from Independence, Maywood area up to Chrysler, 39th and Chrysler. And that place was right on the Santa Fe Trail. And it was very haunted. The grounds were very haunted there. We had, my brother and I, from all our lives, had many experiences. Most of them were not good. Most of them were very frightening. The area we lived in was very much like country. There, everybody had at least an acre of ground around us, and my dad built a small basement to begin with. He dug it out with a team of horses, and from the man he bought the property from. My brother and I had a lot of bad experiences in there. I literally lived in that house until I moved to the house I'm in now. And I've been in my house for 51 years. So, and I'm only now 2 or 3 blocks off the Santa Fe Trail. So I've literally spent all my life on the Santa Fe Trail. I feel like that had a lot to do with some of the hauntings. When we were little, my brother would have horrible dreams of devils that would swoop down at him. I mean, he was terrorized all his life with this. I don't think they were devils now that we're older and we think about it. He was being abducted too. And I think they were aliens. And he knew what a devil looked like, so he just said it was devils. Like I said, we didn't know what an alien was. When we moved into the basement, we had 1 bedroom, we had 2 cribs, and my parents had a bed, and we were all in the same room. And even with all that, I had this awful creature that lived underneath my bed. I named him Bosco. I don't know why. I told my mother about him. I told her I was scared very badly. And she says, oh, he's not there. It's your imagination. And I said, no. And I would sleep in a fetal position, afraid to stick my arm or hand out of the crib. And she said, oh, just get your nerve up and stick your arm out. And you'll see then that this is your imagination. So as time went by, I got my nerve up, stuck my little hand out that crib, and it bit me. I was so mad at my mother. I said, I told you it was real. She still wouldn't believe me. But we saw like a video that played over and over, a scene on the walls, my brother and I both. When we'd have to take naps in the afternoon, we'd lay there and I would look, and I didn't know he was seeing the same thing. About 8 years ago, I was talking to him about what I had seen. He says, oh my God, I seen the same thing. It was these prisoners. They wore striped suits, and there were 2 of them. And they were sitting on bunks that had big springs in them. And they'd talk to each other, and they'd move around. My brother says he remembers a hound dog that was with them. And he saw him smoking cigarettes, which I saw that too, but he said he actually saw the red cherry on the end of the cigarette. He said one time the man looked at him as if he was aware that we were watching him, and he waved at my brother. Now, I don't remember that part, but I sure remember this. And I think it was some sort of a residual paranormal thing that was playing over and over. And I often wonder, since we were on the Santa Fe Trail, perhaps they had a jail there where they held men. But there were so many things. It's all in the book. It would take me a long time, though, to tell you all about the things that happened in that house. When I got to be about 9, I encountered what I called the spacemen. There was, we had a pond directly behind our house, pretty good sized pond. And we'd play down there all the time as kids. And I seen the spaceman, he would follow me. And I called him the spaceman because he had a silver suit. I really couldn't make out what his face was like, whether it was like an alien or what. I just can't quite remember it. What his face, I can remember everything but his face. And I do want to have some regression, and I'm going to write another book after that, along with a lot of my investigation stories. But the spaceman followed me, and my brother told me one time, he said, "Sis, I remember when we were kids and we were out playing with the other neighborhood kids, and you come running up to me, grabbing me, and you were scared to death. And you said, 'Don't you see the spaceman? He's chasing me out here. Don't you see him?' And my brother said he never saw him. But I knew even when he wasn't out there chasing me, he was watching the house, constantly watching me. I became so frightened, and I told my parents, I said, 'They're going to take me.' I didn't know who they were. I just said, 'I'm going to be taken.' I was terrified. My dad, one time, I remember him saying, maybe we should put iron bars on Jeannie's windows and that might make her feel safer. But you see, now I know it wouldn't have made any difference because I was being abducted. I just knew the fear. I didn't know where it was coming from. And I didn't know why I was so scared. I'm sure as a parent now, I would be very upset if my child told me somebody was going to take him. But I kept telling them this. From there, I go to the time when I got married very young. I had 4 miscarriages. In my book, I titled the chapter, "The Baby Stealers." And they took 4 of my children. And in the book, I tell how I know they weren't normal miscarriages. I mean, it was just so obvious when I look back on everything. I was really young back then, in my early 20s. And I just never knew what was going on. But I did get to see one of my children. I've got a drawing in my book that shows it. I was sitting on a bench, and I remember that. And all around me, I was in a round room. It had some windows going around it. It was all chrome. Every bit was very sterile, all chrome. And next to me was some kind of a big machine or something. I think it might have been an anti-gravity machine or something like that. Now, I put the drawing in the book. But I'm sitting there on the bench, and there's like an elevator door to my left. It opened up, and out walked this man with a child. The child was about 8 years old, which would have coincided with the last miscarriage I'd had. This man was blonde, blue-eyed, had a white robe on, had gold ties holding the robe on. The little boy was dressed the same way. He walked the child over to me. Nothing was ever said. Everything was telepathic. He walked the child over to me, and I put my arms around him and held him, and I knew that was my baby. As a mother, I knew. And the little boy looked just like me. He was blonde, blue-eyed, small-featured. I held him for a little while, and then he turned around, and the man took him, and they went back on the elevator. I don't know how I got there, and I don't know how I got home. I thought this was a very vivid dream. Quite a few years after this happened, I was reading the book The Intruders, and Bud Hopkins was, I think, the writer of that, and he was a psychologist that worked with people that were abducted. And there was a lady in there talking. She described the same thing I had happen. I about fell off of my sofa when I read that. I thought, oh my God, this is what happened to me. And that's another reason I'm going to be regressed. I know I have hybrid children out there. So that was the worst thing, very emotional for me. They still are taking me to this day. And I wonder why they're still abducting me at my age. I think it could be sometimes for healings, or they track me. I wake up with all kinds of injuries that I didn't go to bed with, and I try to document as many of them as I can by taking photos, and I keep a diary, because otherwise I just wouldn't be able to remember all of it. So much happens to me all the time, and I've got a lot of that in my book. I had a thing in my book where I talk about fairies. As a child, I've seen fairies. Just one time. It was very glorious. That was a pleasant experience that I remember. And then it was just the one time. But at one other time, I was running through a field to get to a neighbor's house. And there was an old stump out there where somebody had cut down the tree. And there was this little guy on the stump. And he looked at me. He kind of looked like a gnome. And he looked shocked, because I come running through there pretty fast, and he looked kind of shocked that I seen him. And I stopped, and I just looked at him, and he just kind of, he acted like he was kind of shocked and scared of me too, and he just looked back. And then I thought, I don't know what this is. So I ran on to my friend's house. So I talk about why sometimes certain people can see fairies, but other people can't. I had been out on an investigation in Eastern Independence. It's a huge case, not too far from the Missouri River, really close. And I was taking photos. I took a lot of photos there. There were a lot of orbs in the area. And I caught a picture of a fairy. I put that in my book. It is so obvious. You can see her little legs, her head, her wings. It's definitely a fairy. In my book, I also have a chapter on dreams. I talk about psychic dreams that I've had that came true. And then I talk about repetitive dreams. I think anytime you have a dream over and over, something is telling you something that you need to pay really good attention to. My dad was killed in his airplane crash. He had his own little airstrip and everything, and it was very shocking all at once. I was in shock for a year. After about a year, his mother, he was an only child, and his mother, my grandmother, had this big old house, and I show pictures of it, and I talk about this big old house that she had. In this house, she had a dead-end stairway that she said, she called it Fibber McGee's Closet. And I don't know if most of your viewers are old enough to remember Fibber McGee, which was a radio show about this couple, and they were very funny. And Fibber had this closet, and he'd open the door, and on the radio, you'd hear all these pots and pans coming out. Well, I kept having a dream that my dad was telling me to go to that closet, that there was something there he wanted me to find. So I asked my grandmother, I said, because I knew Dad had stored some of his stuff over at her house. I said, does Dad have anything upstairs in that Fibber McGee closet of yours? And, oh, no, honey, he never put anything in there. I said, well, it's really strange. I keep having this dream over and over. Well, I let quite a few months go by, and I kept having the dream. So one day I was over there visiting my grandmother, Nellie, and I said, Grandma, would you mind if I went up there and just looked around? Because I keep having this dream. She says, oh no, child, go ahead. I don't care. So when you went up the steps, and she had a lot of stuff stacked all over these steps where she had used it, thrown everything in this closet too. And you walk up the steps, and then there was a platform, and you turn to the right, and there was about 4 more steps. Well, on them last 4 steps, I find this box, and it was a cigar box, an old cigar box. I opened it up, and there was a lot of papers of my father's in there, and some pictures. So I took it. I thought, this is it. I went downstairs, and Grandma and I went through all that. And what was really strange was my dad had had an affair with another woman that I knew about. And he had her pregnancy test in there. And I knew for a fact that I had a brother. And my dad wanted me to find that. I can remember these people's names, but I can't remember the last name. So, again, that's another reason I want to be regressed so that I can perhaps remember the name. But that's only one of the stories. I have many in there about the dreams and things that happened. But that one was pretty important to me in what I found out. And if you guys are interested in my book, the name of the book is Family Secrets, because a lot of things come out in this book that are paranormal and UFO related. My website is jeanmwalker.com. You can reach me. My email is jmwblondie, BLONDIE, @hotmail.com. You can buy my book on Amazon, and you can also get it in Kindle. Or you can email me, and I will get an autograph copy to you. I'll mail it to you. So any of those ways will work.